MT. Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live. We're here live every Wednesday night at 7:30. Tonight, President Bush publicly estimates that 30,000 Iraqis have died in the war. But that's just a number. We'll look at the lives of 3 Iraqi civilians who were killed. Who were they as people? And we'll talk about the best books of 2005 with New York Times book review editor Sam Tanenhaus. But first, will there be a transit strike Friday morning? Joining me to update us on the situation and talk about the issues underlying the talks are Nicole Gelinas, contributing editor to the Manhattan Institute City Journal, and Stanley Aronowitz, distinguished professor of sociology at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Welcome to both of you. Thanks a lot for coming in tonight. Now, you're more sympathetic to management, you're more sympathetic to the union, but let me ask you first the question that's on everybody's mind. Stanley Aronowitz, give me the odds that there's going to be a strike.
I'd say the odds are 40-60.
40 yes, 60 no?
Yeah, but there's one major wild card. There's a rank-and-file movement that Roger, the president of the union, that Roger Toussaint used to belong to, that was pretty much quiescent for the first term of his office. He broke from that movement, but now it's revived. And a lot of those people are officers at the secondary level.
And they're more radical than he is?
Yes, they are, and they're making a lot of trouble. See, I think a big mistake in this calculation is to believe that Toussaint runs the show. He's the first among many people who have a lot of history, and that union has a lot of history. They've struck before, they've threatened to strike, and I think the strike prospects depend on whether the MTA will back off.
So you're telling me that the union rank and file is angry.
Yes.
And if Roger Toussaint calls a strike, they would be almost too happy to strike if they don't get what they want, and we'll talk about what those things are out of these talks.
That's
correct?
right. And he's got a lot at stake, and what he's got at stake right now is his incumbency. He can't get reelected unless he comes back with a real settlement that they believe is honest and fair.
If he seems too soft, then he's out, which gives him incentive to be hard line. Nicole Gelinas, do you see it the same way?
I see the odds as 50-50, partly due to what Stanley said, and also we have to remember the union has been threatening to strike fairly regularly now, every 3 years, and I think in the leadership's mind, eventually they will have to do as they threaten, or it won't be taken seriously anymore on the part of the mayor, the governor, and the men at the negotiating table. And I think also the stakes are higher this time, just because this is not over salary. If it were, it would be easy. The union would make a demand, the MTA would make a counteroffer, and they would eventually get to where they need to be, as they have in the past. But this is really over pensions and benefits, and at some point one side will have to really cave in.
Let's talk about that, because one of the issues is an MTA demand that new transit workers have a retirement age of 62 rather than the current 55. Here is union official Ed Watt reacting to that idea.
We are not going to create a two-tier system. We are not going to have a job for our future members that is worse off than it is today. We are not going to leave to our children a job that we were not proud of.
Okay, so Nicole Gelinas, there's the issue. 55 versus 62, a two-tier approach, something the police and firefighters recently accepted with respect to their starting salaries, isn't it?
Right, that's correct. The TWU, Mr. Watt, I believe it was, they make this comment often now. Sometimes Mr. Toussaint calls it selling out the unborn, that they refuse to sell out future workers just so they can get a better deal for current workers. But what that means in practice is, since the state constitution prohibits the MTA from tinkering with pension benefits in particular that have already been awarded, and the union refuses to change those benefits for future workers, it means that the MTA can never change benefit enhancements that it's made years and years ago, sometimes during good times.
So if they want to scale them back at all, they have to do it on future workers.
Right, and that's exactly what they're trying to do.
So
Have
Stanley,
to grandmother in the existing workers. That's right.
grandparent in.
Grandparent. Right.
So you know what a lot of our viewers are thinking right now? Who gets to retire at 55?
Well, I think a lot of our viewers are not people who work in some of the more dangerous jobs that we have. I mean, the teachers and a number of other groups have got 30 years and out. They have a 55 pension, and that's not unusual, especially for corporate executives. But it's also not unusual in labor contracts.
Is this a dangerous job?
It is
being a bus driver, being a train conductor,
I think being a
working on the tracks?
bus driver is not the most important section of that union. Being on the tracks, yes. Being in the subway cars as drivers or conductors, obviously. Being in machine shops, yes. Being as a clerk, not particularly. I mean, you know, it depends on the section, but the real heart and soul are the people who work at or near the trains.
So what does this change? You would still have to work for 25 years,
right?
Correct?
Absolutely.
But ending at age 62 rather than ending at age... So you couldn't start at 30 and end at 55 and retire.
That's right.
You'd have to start 7 years later or work 7 years more.
But there is another principle, and that principle is having a two-tier system. Now, whether the cops and the firemen and other groups agree to that, I said this before, Brian, and I can't reiterate it more. This is a union with a long militant history. This is a union with a radical history. I don't mean just ideological, but I mean radical on the shop floor. And this would be, I think, a deal breaker between the union and its membership.
Why wouldn't a two-tier system be acceptable to the rank and file? Because it doesn't affect any of them. It only affects future people who they don't know, who aren't in the union or on the job yet.
Edward said something interesting, and I thought it was rhetorical and a very bright rhetorical thing to say, but it has an element of truth. We're not going to sell out our future generations. This is not a particularly high-paying job, but in New York City, it's a secure job with 22 plus an hour. This is a job that some of these men and women could see their children doing, and they don't want to sell that out. But beyond that, I believe that they think giving in on this level of two-tier is almost classic splitting the ranks. And you know, I think it's about time the Taylor Law got broken. I think it's about
time. The Taylor Law that prohibits strikes by public employees in New York.
And I think if there's any union that's got a chance of doing it, and I say 40-60, I'm not as optimistic as you are. I think it's that union.
We'll come back to why you think it should be broken in a minute. I want to invite our viewers to call in. Okay, folks, we want to know whose side are you on here? Are you more on the worker side or more on management side from what you know about this? 212-251-0801. You see the number on your screen, 212-251-0801. Nicole, the other big issue is health benefits. And the MTA is proposing that the union members start paying 2% of their gross pay toward their health benefit premiums, if I've got this right. Now, they're offering them a 3% raise in the first year. So when you take out the health benefits, 2%, who settles for a 1% raise?
Well, what the 2% would be for the average worker is about $1,000 or so a year. So this is your normal, you know, $40 taken out of your paycheck every 2 weeks in payment of part of your own health care benefits. And this is normal practice in the private sector. Most of us have this amount taken out of our checks. So this isn't anything onerous that the MTA is asking for.
It's onerous for them because they've never had it before.
Sure,
But they're making $47 grand a year. $1,000 is a lot of money.
Well, I believe the bus and train operators, the average take-home pay gross is about $63,000. The cleaners make $40,000, and the rest of them fall somewhere in between there. But whether it's a large amount of money on what is a middle-class solid job isn't the point. This is just this is not a benefit that's available in the marketplace to most of the people the MTA carries each day on its subways and buses. So I don't think this is an issue where the union is going to get a lot of sympathy if people find themselves walking to work in the snow on Friday when they're already paying these kind
Stanley,
of benefits.
doesn't she have a point? This is, like it or not, this is becoming the norm in the American workplace. Workers contribute something to their health care.
It is certainly a norm. I don't think this would be a deal breaker if they made a concession on that issue. But I think it still has to be said that this is a country which is essentially in the 19th century. We have a world in which in every other major industrialized country, health care is part of your right. This is true in Canada, it's true in Western Europe, and we are one of the few countries of our caliber which requires people to kick into the health care.
And Nicole, it may be becoming universal in this country, but is this good? Isn't this part of a nationwide power play by management to shift more and more costs onto employees? So what used to be considered a management responsibility to cover health premiums 100% now gets shared. What used to be a management responsibility to cover pensions now is being shifted to employees through 401ks, comes out of the paycheck. Why should workers be sympathetic? Why should our viewers be sympathetic to this power play by management going on all over the country?
I think it's an attempt to deal with serious demographic issues that the nation will have to deal with on many levels, one way or the other, as the baby boomers start to retire. We are seeing this in the public sector with Social Security becoming increasingly unaffordable. The promises made to current workers really just, it's a mathematical certainty that we won't be able to make good on them unless we significantly raise taxes. And it's the same issue with
There are
pensions.
a lot of people who disagree with that and say that it just needs to be tweaked a little bit, or just a fraction of 1% tax increase, but that's another show.
Yeah, and this, yeah, I would disagree with that, but yeah, that's another show. But this issue is these pensions. Many of the level of benefits were awarded when these benefits were to be paid far in the future. The MTA isn't saying it's not going to make good on these benefits. They're just looking at a changed world and saying health costs, as life expectancy has grown, and pension costs as well, are going to be far more expensive than we had calculated maybe 20, 30 years ago, and we need to rein in these costs going forward. And I think, as you had mentioned, as it applies on the national level, this is an effort to share costs. We all are going to be older.
Share makes it sound like something you're giving, not something you're taking away.
Yeah, well, but what about the general tax structure, both in New York State and nationally? We have a president who is giving away a lot of money to a lot of very rich people. And in the state, everybody's afraid to have a progressive tax system and the federal government because they're afraid business is going to strike back. But look.
But Stanley, you can't put this on Bush. Nicole wrote in her op-ed piece in the Times yesterday, and tell me if you disagree with the number, that the way health and pension costs are growing, they'll take a third of the value of our bus and subway fares by 2008. Is that what the riders want to be spending so much of their money on, rather than maintenance and new cars and new rails and things like that?
No, of course not. But the people who do the driving and the people who repair the maintenance are the people who are now have the grievance, and they're going to be spending an awful lot of money for their health and their pension costs. It means that every salary increase, every wage increase that they get, as you pointed out, will, in this case, a 1% net, which is 2% below the inflation rate, at the very least. In New York City, it's supposed to be 3.8. So they're really taking a wage cut in order to preserve their pension and their health benefits. I think the problem at this point is that the MTA is a state agency, but it is not the same way politically accountable to the taxpayers.
Let's take some
That's
phone
a big
calls. A lot of you are calling in. Everybody has an opinion about the bus and subway strike, right? So, Doug on Staten Island. You're on Brian Lehrer Live. Thanks for calling, Doug.
Good evening, Brian. How are you this
Good.
evening?
How you doing?
Pretty well. Thank you. I see this, Brian, as kind of a fight across this country. As an educator, I looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the top 16 jobs they tell me to teach my kids for, only 2 of them require a college degree. And what you have is the institutionalization of private power to the point where it's stronger than the democratic state itself.
Well, you have to explain that to me. Of the top 16 jobs in terms of pay, only 2 of them require a college degree. You read that somewhere?
Yeah, you go to the 2003 Bureau of Labor Statistics issued by the Bureau of Labor.
And what are some of these jobs that don't require a college degree that are so remunerative?
Okay, well, the 2 top jobs were teacher and nurse. The other jobs were that they told our kids we should prepare them for, the next 14, were in order: retail sales, customer service, food preparation, cashiers, janitor, general operations, waiters, nursing aides, truck drivers, receptionists, security guards, office clerks, teachers' assistants.
I see your point, and I misunderstood your original point. You're saying those are the jobs that are going to be available more and more. Those are the growth positions, like it or not, because those would be relatively low-paying jobs, Stanley.
Well, they'll be relatively low-paying jobs as long as we don't have unions in those industries. And they'll be relatively low-paying jobs if you measure them against the transit jobs or teachers' jobs or nurses' jobs. But they could be better.
So this is the Walmart debate, transferred to the Transport Workers Union, because it's about relatively unskilled labor or low-skilled labor, not that they're really unskilled, but they're blue-collar jobs that they can be trained to do. And what kind of benefits and what kind of wages are they going to have?
This is a nation that's grown on constant immigration, and that's why we have a constant level of poverty, but that's not always the same people who are stuck in that bottom tier. We constantly bring in new immigrants, they educate themselves, they better themselves in the workforce, and they move up, and their children, we see it every generation, children move to the suburbs, they get a good American education, and they end up doing better, getting the good jobs.
And you believe that those people are going to do better than their parents?
They have so far.
No, I think
we
it's
create the nation.
What's the demographic makeup of the TWU? Do you know?
It's mostly minority, but getting back on the
mostly
subject.
What minority? Is it more and more immigrants?
There's immigrants, Trinidadian immigrants, many immigrants from the West Indies. Mr. Toussaint, I believe, was either from Trinidad or Jamaica.
So a lot of those folks probably are doing better than their parents, moving into these civil service jobs, into the middle class, just like Italians and Irish and Jews did 100 years ago?
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is not that they don't do better than the people that they came from in Trinidad and Tobago, where Roger Toussaint came from. No, but it's their children that are not doing as well as they do. And that's what they're worried about in this struggle with the MTA. Will we be better off than our future generations?
That's the two-tier.
But we are putting, even if we agree that this is a fight on the national level, these workers are going to find themselves eventually as the pawn in that fight. If you look at what is happening at General Motors, at Ford, we have individuals who were promised very high levels of benefits, unsustainable levels of benefits, and now that they reach retirement age, those benefits are being taken away. Someone who has a personal retirement account where the corporation gives them money, they save that money in the market, that money can never be taken away. That money belongs to you. $1,000 that belongs to me is worth much more than $1,200.
We could arrange a pension system that's portable, but where the employer contributes rather than the employee, right?
Oh, sure, we could do that. I don't think the TWU would want to do that. I think they would prefer their guaranteed retirement after 25 years. But we see what's happening with Ford, GM, with benefits having been promised, and I think if the MTA is doing the proactive thing to try to get these costs under control before they spiral out of control, these workers are the ones who will eventually suffer because people want to make them the pawn in someone else's national fight.
You said it very eloquently.
They would be better off with their own pensions.
Diego in Brighton Beach, you're on Brian Lehrer Live. Hello, Diego.
Yes, good evening. I'm going to say, especially in this country, I guess it's the only country where there's such a discrepancy and between workers, especially in blue-collar workers. Because if you work in an haberdashery store, you work in a pharmacy, you work in the private sector, you don't get nothing comparable with what you get in teachers, policemen.
Right.
The transit workers, they make an immense quantity of money because they got a lot of benefits in medical. I pay 20% from my Medicare. Now I'm going to pay $520 every 3 months, and I got Medicare. And I'm not going to have medicines.
So, and Diego, thank you. A lot of New Yorkers probably feel this way. Here's a very secure job, as you mentioned before.
Yes, it is.
All they're being asked for is a 2% contribution to their health benefits. To take a strike over this, are people going to support that?
Well, I think as I said, I think the major issue is two-tier, and I think that's where the cutting edge
on
is
the
gonna be.
retirement age.
That's correct. I think a larger conversation has to take place about how we're going to take care of people in their pension and their health care. I think contributory pension and health care programs are abominable, but we all do them by and large. The problem is when I give 15% of my income for a supplementary pension, which I do, I make a hell of a lot more than transit workers.
That's as a CUNY professor.
You bet. And I make a lot more than transit workers. And I think it's...
You have a PhD.
Well, I don't care about...
You've written books.
Well, yeah, all that notwithstanding, we still have to pay the same money for food, for shelter, for our lives. They get 50% at 25 years of their wages. I won't take the $63,000 number. I think it's closer to $52,000, $53,000.
Average wages.
Put you solidly in New York's middle class.
$25K, please.
Oh, the average wage in New York City is $49,000.
No, he's talking about the pension, which is 50% of that wage.
That's right.
They retire with a 50% pension, not an 80% pension. So
80% pension. That's
half of 60 is a $30,000 pension. It's not that much.
But you talk about how this is a question, whose responsibility are these pensions? And I think this is certainly a discussion the nation has to have apart from the TWU. If you look at a subway worker who retires at 55, what's happening is that worker will work for 25 years and he'll be retired likely for longer than he worked. And this is good news, really. I mean, in the past, you were only expected to live a few years after retirement, but whose responsibility is this good news?
So people are living to 85,
oh, sure.
then work to 55, and then you work for 25 years and you draw a pension for 30.
Sure,
and you pick up your Social Security at 65.
Christina in, let's see, Clinton Hill. Hi, you're on Brian Lehrer Live.
Hello, yes. I would like to ask Stanley what the union uses as its evaluation tool to evaluate the workers who do a good job and how they're rewarded versus workers that may not be working up to their full potential or the amount of efficiency that's expected for their job.
Is your point that you don't think that transit workers work as hard as they could?
I'm not saying all of them. I see some of them that work extremely hard. But I do see some workers that treat tourists very rudely, and they're probably making more than the people that they're supposed to be helping.
Okay. Stanley, and I'll ask you too, Nicole. Is the public getting its money's worth in the quality of the work?
Oh, my God, yeah. This is the best transit system in the world. There are prettier ones like Washington, and Paris is lovely, but Paris is a very small town compared to New York. This is a system that, generally speaking, works, and the reason it works is because the workers work very hard. And they work overtime to be able to make a living, and I think that's upsetting. But they do work overtime to make a living. We have very, very safe system. We have some accidents. There's serious ones, but it's a very, very active system. Yes, they work hard, and
Nicole,
I think there'll always be people who won't work as hard as others.
Briefly, any different view?
Well, part of what the MTA wants is for the union to explore ways of improving their productivity, doing what some of the city's municipal unions have done. The sanitation union financed their raises above inflation with productivity gains, but of course that would mean looking at worker by worker, what is getting done for the amount of time and for the amount of money spent, and that's not something that the union wants to get into. It's also something that the MTA certainly can't take a lot of credit for. They're not very creative in their own management of their workers and in management of the non-unionized management, but this is a problem on both sides.
John in Ozone Park, we've got about 20 seconds for you.
John, don't you believe that a two-tier pension where you hold the money for 7 more years would enhance the pension?
Enhance the pension. They'll get more at the end of it.
Yeah, well, they may not get more, but it certainly would. It certainly would control costs. I think if you spend 25 years in that system, you've worked yourself pretty hard. And I think the public has to understand the degree to which a transit job is a hard job, and a job that has a lot of accidents in it, of workers, people whose health has been impaired. There's a lot of problems that have not been brought out in the public that need to be discussed.
2 things, real quick, before we run out of time. Nicole, has the MTA blown this? They're giving us all these, perhaps totally unnecessary, holiday discounts, communicating that they have a surplus when they projected that they would have a deficit. So why should people trust their numbers? And doesn't this enrage the workers even more because they're doing givebacks to the writers and telling the workers that they want givebacks from them?
I think we'll see tomorrow night if the MTA has blown it, and they certainly could explain their side of the situation much better to the public. Half of their surplus will go straight to the workers. It's going to fund pension liabilities that were already incurred. The holiday discounts, you know, it's 5% of this year's surplus. It was probably in practice a bad idea. It did get the workers more angry than they may have been, but it doesn't have a big impact on the actual finances.
The 2 of you have 1 minute to settle this strike before it starts. What's the proposal that will do it?
I would offer higher raises in exchange for some kind of good faith give back on the pensions and or the health benefits, either a 5% raise with 2% or 3% to go toward the health care premiums, or a higher raise in exchange for a couple of years added on to the age to retirement, just to get this.
You think that'll do it without, while still proposing the 2-tier?
I think it would get us going in the right direction, and I think the union, which will, if it strikes, will already be very surprised at how little sympathy it gets from the public. It will really have to explain itself clearly if it's saying why we are going out on strike for a generous raise.
Stanley, 20 seconds. Settle this strike.
Drop the 2-tier, sweeten the wage increase, and hold the line and set up a commission to really have a company and a union discussion of what to do about pensions and health benefits. But don't make this an object of this settlement, because there's been no study. There's nobody who believes the MTA anything it says.
Stanley, Aronowitz, Nicole, Gelinas, thank you both very much. We'll see what happens tomorrow night. Get ready to walk or bike to work just in case. And coming up in a minute, President Bush publicly estimates that 30,000 Iraqis have died in the war. We'll look at the lives of 3 of those people as portrayed in a CUNY art exhibit. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
When it comes to continuing education, all stops lead to CUNY. More than 200,000 New Yorkers of all ages in all 5 boroughs are enrolled in CUNY adult education courses. If you're looking for new job skills to enhance your career, start a new career, or if you want to enjoy a class in the arts, sciences, and humanities, then get on the train and come to one of CUNY's 19 campuses. CUNY continuing and professional education programs offer you more opportunities than any other learning institution in New York City. CUNY gives you high-quality instruction at low cost with schedules to meet your busy lifestyle. For more information, call 1-866-344-CUNY or log on to www.cuny.edu/continuinged. Hurry up, don't miss your stop, come to CUNY.
This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
This is Brian Lehrer Live. We're here live every Wednesday night at 7:30. President Bush surprised just about everybody this week when he gave an actual estimate of the number of Iraqis killed in the war. Did you see it?
Okay. Since the inception of the Iraq War, I'd like to know the approximate total of Iraqis who have been killed, and by Iraqis, I include civilians, military, police, insurgents, translators.
How many Iraqi citizens have died in this war? I would say 30,000, more or less, have died as a result of the initial incursion and the ongoing violence against Iraqis. We've lost about 2,140 of our own troops in Iraq.
30,000, that's a big number. But it is just a number. Who are these people? Well, now showing at the CUNY Graduate Center at 34th and 5th is an exhibition called Picturing Atrocity. One compelling part of the exhibit is modeled after the Portraits of Grief series the New York Times did just after 9/11. Remember that? It was short profiles of the lives of individuals killed in the attack to help give them some personal dignity in death, not just to be anonymous 1 out of 3,000. Do you remember the obituaries in the Times that looked like these? So now, out of these 30,000 Iraqis estimated by the president, some estimate more, we'll show you a few of them as portrayed in this exhibition and talk about a few of these Iraqi lives. As you can see, the format is the same. With me now is Geoffrey Batchen, professor of art history at the CUNY Graduate Center, where he specializes in the history of photography, and Amanda Brown, a PhD student of art history and a team leader in curating the exhibit. Welcome to both of you. Thank you very much for coming in. And Professor Batchen, did you purposely model this after the Times Portrait of Grief series?
We did. The idea, I think, was to try and address ourselves to our own responsibility, that is, we who live here in the United States, to these deaths that have occurred over there. And it seemed like a respectful way to do it would be to try and mimic the same kind of respectful biographies that were given to the people who were killed in the World Trade Center. But also making a statement that if the Times did it for Americans, then somebody should do it for Iraqis? Yeah, something like that. I mean, the art of it, if you like, is to try and invent a rhetorical form that American observers can understand, can empathize with, can pause for a moment and think about, and in that way also pause and think about our responsibility for these greater numbers of Iraqi civilians that have been killed over there. We'll talk about a few of these individuals as we go, but how did you find individual stories, and how did you decide which handful out of 30,000 dead to write about and photograph? Let me just say first that this project comes out of a class, so 12 people contributed in different ways to the overall project, and about half of the class decided to work on the Portraits of Grief series. The usual way, and so each of them worked on them slightly differently, I should say. Usually the first stop was the Iraq Body Count website, where an organization is trying to keep track as best they can of Iraqi civilians who have been killed. I know that website. They're not estimating. They're trying to take the documented deaths and only count them. And they've also got about 30,000 as their number. A little over 30,000 now. I mean, what they actually do is cull news stories, and they give you in the website the news sources where these deaths are reported. And so, in a sense, they document it. In some cases, of course, we don't really know who's been killed and how many and so on. But they give you as much information as they can. And then when you have that information, you can go to other websites. The Manchester Guardian, for example, in Britain in 2003 kept fairly careful track of who was being killed during the invasion, in part because they have a large Iraqi diaspora in Britain, and they can get information about people who were killed through their relatives. And you use that information, and then you write a narrative mimicking the form of the Portraits of Grief series in the New York Times. So let's show you again the slide that was up a minute ago. This example, Ali Ricard, a future football star. Tell us about the life of Ali Ricard. Ali Ricard was a member of a family who were gathering for a large wedding near the Syrian border. And at 2:45 a.m. during 2004, the tent that they were all sleeping in was bombed by an American helicopter gunship. And Ali, his mother, his father, his two sisters, and his two brothers were all killed. His older brother, who was the one being married, survived because he was in a separate tent with his new bride. So what has been done here is we've tried to give a subjectivity, a personhood back to this otherwise nameless statistic under the name of Ali Raqid, imagining what it would be like to be a 12-year-old Iraqi boy.
12-year-old.
Yeah.
Amanda, do I understand correctly that the people killed who are eligible for portraits of grief were only those killed by American forces, not those killed by the insurgents or by sectarian violence among Iraqis?
That was the criteria that we used. We specifically wanted to acknowledge our own complicity as American citizens in the deaths in Iraq, and we had to make that decision.
Only our own complicity? Why limit it to that?
We are American citizens, and we have a certain responsibility for what's happening in Iraq right now, and we wanted to acknowledge it somehow. And this was a project that developed out of several weeks, if not a month, of class discussions in which we thought this was something important to deal with.
Do you want to elaborate that on that, Professor Batchen? We have a certain responsibility, but maybe we don't have the sole responsibility for all the deaths, as the selection criteria might indicate.
It might, but there's a few factors I think you have to take into account here. One is the exhibition consists of 14 cabinets. You can't do everything in 14 cabinets. The media already quite properly accords our own troops who have been killed due honour, obituaries and so on. But the one thing the media has been incredibly silent about are these civilians who are being killed by American, as American collateral damage during the invasion and the occupation. So it seemed that one little contribution that a 12-person class at CUNY Graduate Centre might make is spend a semester thinking about those people, trying to come up with a visual and rhetorical form that might do them justice. And we hope the people who come into the Graduate Centre might pause for a moment, think about, indeed, our complicity with these deaths. When our president sends our troops over there, they are, in a sense, acting on our behalf and in our interests.
Let's look at another one of these Iraqis as an individual, Khalid Ali Saleh, a gentle soldier. Amanda, do you want to talk us through him a little bit?
We should say Amanda actually worked on the other half of this project.
And we'll get to that.
Okay.
So if you want to do this, Professor Batchen, go ahead.
One of the things we were looking to do was not only highlight those Iraqis who've been killed specifically by American troops, but also to give a kind of portrait of Iraq. So in a sense, you're asking, how do we select from the 30,000? We're in part trying to give a range of ages, genders, class positions, and so on and so forth. And we deliberately tried to choose subjects that might actually make people think a little more thoughtfully about who these Iraqis are. I mean, we hear these words, 30,000 Iraqis, but what comes to mind? A 12-year-old kid who likes to play soccer, an ex-soldier who likes to garden, a woman gynecologist, a 20-year-old who likes to play loud music. We forget they are people.
So tell us the story of Khalid. Who was he? How old was he? How did he die?
In his case, he died when an American tank round was fired into his car, and then a second tank round was also fired into the car, and his body was incinerated while he sat in it. Beyond that, what we have is a kind of life like any other retired gentleman. He liked to garden. He liked corresponding with his two children who had actually left Iraq. We have the sense of the ordinariness of him, and that's quite an important element of the project.
And he was 72 years old.
Right.
Amanda, the other part of this exhibit, the one that I guess you're more involved with, has to do with photographs of atrocities, including Abu Ghraib photographs, and how we deal with those. Tell us what you were after there.
It was actually a questionnaire project that dealt specifically with Abu Ghraib photographs and how the public, two parts, how the public remembers these photographs, to what extent do they remember them, and how are they inscribed within their memory, to what extent can they even describe them.
And then some of these photographs are framed in the CUNY Graduate Center lobby right now, right?
Actually, we only have them present through the forms of the questionnaire.
The questionnaires.
So the photographs aren't actually there, they're represented through words.
Right.
So the first part was, to what extent do people even remember these images, and what is their reaction to them? I think the impetus for the project was knowing that as within the class as PhD students, we tended to have similar politics and a similar reaction to the photographs, but there was an awareness and a curiosity that we're a small portion of the population, and we really wanted to open up the discussion.
Did you get some interesting results?
We did. We did it actually within a 1-block radius of the Graduate Center, trying to locate it to the specifics of where we're at school. And a surprising amount of people did not remember the photographs, did not know what they were, which we found both upsetting and a little bit surprising. That
there are a few that I think have become iconic. So if you had, you know, Lindy England with the leash, probably people would have recognized that, or was that one of them?
It was actually, we decided not to show images. We just had a questionnaire that said, are you familiar with the Abu Ghraib photographs? So it's possible that some people had seen them but weren't able to connect it with the term, but we did say Abu Ghraib Iraqi prison photographs. So it was surprising that a good deal of the people we canvassed had absolutely no idea. And then for those that did know, the extent to which people were able to remember them and describe them visually varied quite a bit. It tended to be that if we interviewed graduate students, they were able to describe it in a little more detail. A lot of people found them shocking and upsetting, but there was a good deal of people that we canvassed within the immediate vicinity that didn't really see what the problem was, and saying, we know the Iraqis are doing worse to us, and there's no point in making our troops look bad in this way. So we got a variety of responses, including one response that was basically just, I don't care, I don't care, I don't care, to every question. So.
Interesting. Professor Batchen, did it ever occur to you during the reign of Saddam Hussein to show portraits of some of the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis that he is believed to have ordered slaughtered, or for that matter, the million or so people estimated to have died in the war he started against Iran?
Well, the Bush administration and the media in general have done a pretty good job of reminding us of that background to the invasion, and in a way I don't think our small contribution would be much use. As I say, that the context of this particular project was the relative silence in the public discourse about these civilians who are being killed.
You were quoted in the New York Sun saying you don't consider this an anti-war exhibit.
Right.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, no, it is accurate. The project, and you know, part of the discussion amongst the group who worked on it was we wanted to think of a kind of project or a group of projects that would actually have something useful to offer the sort of people that come into the Graduate Center. There's no point just telling them what they already know. There's no point doing something that's so heavy-handedly didactic that it, in a sense, has no effect. So what we tried to do was to produce projects that actually might provoke thought on people who otherwise, you imagine, are reasonably well informed. In that context, this particular project seemed to be one that where even people who, for example, are actually opposed to the war have not seemingly given much thought to the civilian casualties. I mean, there's so much politicization of the discussion of the war. Little attention is actually being paid to the effects of that war on civilians in Iraq. So the project is quite deadpan. I mean, it simply provides information. It doesn't offer a particular opinion. It seems to me whether you supported the invasion or whether you were against it, in both cases you now need to take responsibility for the consequences of the actions.
And it also doesn't tell us whether Iraqis feel that these 30,000 of their countrymen and women have died in vain or died for a better future, as President Bush would claim.
Right. Well, hopefully the elections, if they can indeed be fair and reasonable, might finally give the Iraqis some voice over their own future. It remains to be seen.
So let's look at the life of one more individual. We'll show this slide. And this is Saif al-Azawi, a lover of music. Tell us about Saif.
He's a 20-year-old man who died while in the midst of celebrating his exam results. He was driving the family car and he had the music up loud. And who knows quite what happened. Perhaps he didn't hear a command to stop at a checkpoint, and he was shot as a consequence. Again, a story of a typical, teenager, post-teenager going about a typical day. Again, the idea behind the writing of such a script is to give people a sense that here's somebody more or less like them that they could actually empathize with.
If people want to see this for themselves, how long more will it be up in the CUNY Graduate Center?
It's up until December 20th. We welcome as many visitors as we can get.
Amanda, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Professor Batchen, thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
That CUNY Graduate Center is at 34th and 5th. And coming up next, the best books of the year with Sam Tanenhaus, editor of the New York Times Book Review. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
Prominent professors, outstanding students, illustrious alumni. All on the Emmy-nominated magazine show about CUNY. Hi, I'm Vianora Vinca. Join us this Sunday when we'll bring you the stories about people and programs that make CUNY a place where you study with the best.
World famous art star.
What? Art or something like it.
To make art.
What's going on in New York?
Art or something like it.
And I'm a photographer.
The life of an artist or something like it.
I say, watch art or something like it.
I play many roles: parent, actor, champion for literacy. But my most important role is actually reading to my child. You have an important role in your child's life too. Reading to them every day. Learn more about reading to your child by calling the National Center for Family Literacy.
This is Brian Lehrer Live. We're here live every Wednesday night at 7:30. We live in the age of nonfiction, whether it's Thomas Friedman or Malcolm Gladwell, Jared Diamond, or Joan Didion. Many nonfiction books today are generating the sales, prestige, and impact that we usually associate with novels. Some people say reality is so complex today, novels can't do it justice. Now, that may or may not be true, but nonfiction books are hot, make good holiday gifts, and are one of the categories in the New York Times Book Review Best Books of 2005. We're delighted to have with us now to talk about both fiction and nonfiction the editor of the Times Book Review, Sam Tanenhaus, as I say, to talk about both nonfiction and fiction picks, and to hear some of yours on the phones. You can call us with your favorite fiction or nonfiction books of 2005, 212-251-0801. Hi, Sam. Thanks a lot for coming.
Hi, Brian. Nice to be here.
First, tell us how you do it. I'm always amazed at all the great books that come out in a given year, how you can do a page like this that narrows it down to, well, I guess it's precisely 10 fiction, 10 or 5 fiction, 5 nonfiction, right?
That's right. Yeah, in previous years, the book review had a variable number. It could be 7 best books of the year, or a dozen, or 15. We decided to make it 10, a round number, just as we did the previous week with 100 notable books. The list is smaller, but we think it's easier for readers to grasp.
Right. And how did you go about making the list? Can you share some of the secrets by which you and the other editors of the book review come to the table and say, okay, this is a best 5, this is not?
Well, I wish it were more scientific and rational than it is. We do it on the basis of our own impressions of the books that have come through, and also on the basis of the reviews that our very fine critics have prepared and written for us. In the end, it's very subjective. That's one of the pleasures of reading, is that it's each reader's response to the book that he or she sees, and we achieve a kind of consensus, and I'm the boss, so I make the final call, but there's usually not much disagreement when we get down to the final books.
One of the very most talked about nonfiction books of the year is Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking, and this book is notable, among other reasons, for the fact that it's about someone's grief, and as personal as it is about the sudden death of her husband and then the unexpected fatal illness of their only daughter, you might not think that people would flock to a book like that, but they really have.
They did. They have done so, I think, for a number of reasons. First of all, Joan Didion is one of the great writers of our time, one of the great prose writers in American fiction and nonfiction, but she's often been a kind of detached clinical writer, and this was a time, and this is an occasion where she's as clinical and detached as ever, but she's writing about this searing experience, which is the death of her husband, John Gregory Dunn, also a notable writer. And at the point she was writing the book, just the illness of her daughter, who died after it was published. And it was the combination of Didion's detachment, her superb prose, and also her reaching inside herself in a way that readers hadn't seen before, that made this the phenomenon it was. And not only a book that was critically admired, but it's had huge sales.
Yes.
Now it's slated for Broadway.
How about that? This kind of book on Broadway, it's hard to believe.
And she's as surprised as anyone else, I understand. And this was a case where Didion sort of meshed all her great gifts to tell a very searing personal story. And it's also, lest readers be put off by this, quite funny in places.
Yes.
And something she discovered was that the best guide for dealing with grief was Emily Post,
really?
The old manners writer. Absolutely, because Emily Post wrote in an era where death was a part of the routine of normal living. And what Didion found, as I think a lot of us do who have experienced death, is that it's the sense the people around you have of courtesy and tact that matters so much at this important time.
It's the same reason, really, that people turn to religion, even if they have not been religious, at a time of grief, because they need some kind of structure. They need somebody to tell them what to do to get through this. So people will turn to the rituals of the religion that they grew up in, perhaps even if they haven't been practicing most of their life. And I guess Emily Post strangely falls into that category. But I want to go on to the next book.
Yes.
Because our time is limited, and we want to get to a number of these books. Among the issue-oriented books, George Packer's The Assassin's Gate. Kind of book we would discuss on this show. He's been on my radio show a number of times this year, and this is the book that you chose about Iraq for this year.
Well, that's right. You've put it very well. There have been so many books on Iraq, and readers want to know which one they should read, and many of them have been very good books. What sets George Packer's book apart is he gives you the entire arc of the narrative. That is, the story begins before the invasion with a debate about Iraq. And some of your viewers will remember that before he went to the New Yorker, Packer wrote a piece in the New York Times Magazine about what he called the liberal hawks. That is, liberals who favored the invasion. And Packer was really, although he didn't identify himself as such, among them.
One, yes.
And what he found was once he left the debate behind and went to Iraq, where he reported from the New Yorker and saw what happened on the ground, all the mistakes, disastrous in scope, that occurred. And then he also follows the war back home and traces some of the consequences. Until we see 10, 20 years from now, the full history of the war in Iraq, we thought this was the book that would take you through the story in the most comprehensive way.
Another book, completely different, Jonathan Harr's The Lost Painting. Tell us about that. This is one that probably a lot of our viewers have not heard about.
Yes, although they will remember Jonathan Harr as the author of A Civil Action, which was an enormous bestseller and a very successful film. And what Harr has done is to write what we thought was a model of nonfiction narrative. You know, there have been many questions raised recently about the liberties nonfiction writers take, inventing conversations, penetrating the thoughts of people they can't possibly know, inventing scenes and dialogue and all the rest.
Did he do that?
Harr does not do that, and that's the virtue of the book, is that he tells the story in a very almost detached way. There's no showmanship in the prose, but it's a fascinating story about the painter Caravaggio, who probably is more interesting to us today than any other Renaissance or late Renaissance painter. And he tracks the search for this lost painting and takes you into the world of archivists and restorers and art historians. He learned and mastered Italian so he could speak to people in their own language when he spent time there. And it's a model of a contemporary nonfiction narrative.
You picked a great history book to include this year, Tony Judd's Post-War.
You have to read this book. Even the first couple of chapters will make you see how extraordinary an accomplishment this is. Sometimes the best books deal with very simple themes, and the simple theme here is we take for granted Europe's primacy, its recovery after World War II. And what Judd, a professor at NYU, does is to take you back to 1945 and show you a continent that was a smoking ruin and how it managed to reclaim itself to become the great universe we now know it to be of Eastern and Central and Western Europe. He covers them all. In a paragraph, he'll give you details about 6 or 7 different countries. Everything you think you know, he very subtly undermines to the sheer depth and range of his knowledge and detail. It's really extraordinary work of narrative history.
Can you give me an example of something we think we know about Europe that he subtly undermines?
Yes, I'll tell you something very important that we should have kept in mind at the time of the aftermath in Iraq. That is when the question of de-Baathification came up. That is, the decision was made by this administration that anyone who'd been involved in the Ba'athist Party, Saddam's party, really should be excluded from administering the post-war government. And what Jut shows you in a very understated way was after World War II, when Germany was really had already emerged as the crux of the Cold War conflict between the West and the East, Western Europe, the United States, and Russia, that in fact many members of the Nazi Party were installed in positions of power, not because there was any ideological love for them, but because this was the administrative class.
Let's touch 2 fiction books real quick before we run out of time.
Sure.
Give me sound bites on a novel. Oh my God! But Zadie Smith, I loved her first novel, White Teeth. Her new one is called On Beauty, and you picked it.
Well, this is her comeback. Zadie Smith is perhaps the most gifted writer of a new generation. She's not yet 30 years old. She's a Brit, but here she has set a story in the United States, in fact in Boston, and it feels a little bit like Harvard. And what she has done is to present the culture wars that occur in American academia with an absolutely pitch-perfect sense for how all the different players speak and think. It's a remarkable novel.
And Ian McEwan is back with Saturday.
Saturday. This is not a novel as great as Atonement, which many of your viewers will know. It really is a masterpiece of modern fiction. But McEwan, I think, with the possible exception of John Updike, writes the best sentences in English prose today. And he's a joy to read just for the exquisiteness of the writing and then the fineness of the perception.
So what do you think this list says about the times we live in? Anything?
Well, it says something that you mentioned before. This is, for better or worse, a nonfiction time, and it's something we in the book review have written about. Also, it shows that fiction can do something no nonfiction book can do, which is to capture sort of the ambient music of a moment. And this is what writers like Smith and McEwan have said.
Sam Tanenhaus, editor of the New York Times Book Review. I'll be reading. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
And that's it for tonight's Brian Lehrer Live. We are here live every Wednesday night at 7:30. Next week, The Positive Side of Public Housing, a documentary about living in Queensbridge. Meanwhile, join me every weekday morning at 10 for my radio call-in show. That's on WNYC, New York Public Radio. Tomorrow, the latest on the transit talks, and labor activist Jonathan Tassini, who's running against Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate. That's 10 o'clock tomorrow morning on AM 820 and 93.9 WNYC. Have a great night.